I'm going to turn it over to Amy Tankersley of Mississippi State, and she's going to take it from there.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on how 3 imposters did OER technology and accessibility during the pandemic. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Tankersley. I am an associate professor from Mississippi State Community College in Knoxville, Tennessee. I am presenting with Suzanne Etheridge, an associate professor of math at Mississippi State, and Mary Monroe Ellis, professor of math at Mississippi State. The purpose of our webinar today is to share with you several of the things that we have learned and successfully incorporated into our classes over the last year. We have several things to share with you, so we won't be going into a lot of detail on any of the items, but we hope that you will take away some things that you'll be able to implement at your institutions. So the first thing I want to talk about is why we call ourselves imposters, because that does stand out in our title. So we like to blame this on Suzanne because she takes it very well and we can get away with it. This started back in the spring of 2019. Enrollment in some of our general education math classes was declining, but enrollment in our statistics classes was increasing because that became the class that most students need to take. Between us, we had at the time about 80 years of teaching experience, and the 3 of us none of us had taught statistics before. So Suzanne decided it was time for us to teach statistics. It was time for her to teach statistics, and she immediately asked us if we were interested also. Mary jumped in pretty quickly, and it took me a little while to take the plunge, but I did. I took the plunge. So during the summer of 2019, we spent the whole summer working through the course and learning different technologies and trying to prepare for the fall. We were going to use the textbook that was adopted by our school to teach it in the fall, in the hopes that we could redesign it using all OER and fully accessible materials in the future. So fall came along and we were ready to teach, and we each had a section. And during our college-wide in-service, we went to a session on imposter syndrome. So at the time, that was really the buzz phrase, and I think it probably still is to a certain degree. So we immediately adopted that for ourselves. We knew we were imposters, even though we had been successful teachers for a long time. We felt like imposters. We spent the whole semester consulting our veteran statistics teachers and other resources to learn about things that we knew nothing about. So then comes spring of 2020, and most importantly, March of 2020. Everything shuts down, and we have to suddenly shift gears from teaching on campus to teaching virtually, and we had 2 weeks to prepare for this. So suddenly we felt like a whole brand new set of imposters once again. We had not taught online before. We only knew the bare minimum, so we had a lot to learn. We jumped in right away and started learning as much as we could all the way through the summer. We did some learning, and we're actually still learning some things, but today we want to show you a lot of the things we've learned and are now using successfully. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary and let her share with you how we started with OER.
So our journey with open educational resources actually started back in the fall of 2015. I was teaching business calculus for the first time. It's August before the fall semester starts. The calculus book is laying on my desk in my office. My office door is open. And I do have to say, the book was laying on my desk. It had not been opened yet, and it's August, so that was a little scary, yes. But a colleague walked by, happened to stick her head in my office and said, "Hey, you teaching business cal? I am too. You want to work together?" I'm like, absolutely. I can work with somebody. I can, have somebody to bounce ideas off of. I can do half the work. It's like, yes. So we taught business calculus for that first semester using our department adopted textbook. And we were probably 5-6 weeks in it, and we weren't really terribly happy with it. We didn't really like materials. We didn't like how we were so tied to the book. We didn't really like the homework, but we were newly teaching this class. So that was the best place to start. But we decided that we would rather create our own materials. There were lots of reasons for that. One reason was we didn't like the book we were using. And we didn't like being tied to the 3-year publishing cycle. You get everything the way you want it, and then they change an edition and all kinds of things change and you have to go fix everything. So we found that terribly annoying. And of course, textbooks are expensive. Okay? We teach at a community college. We have students who don't have enough money for food. So at that time, asking them to pay $150 for a textbook was just more than we could stomach. It's like, no, we can't do that. So we decided that we would create our own materials that the students could use for free. And if we were going to go to the trouble to create our own materials, we needed to make sure that they were accessible for all of our students. Now, there are many paths to get to OER for your students. We chose to take some of the things that we had created in the class already and build on those and put them in HTML, which is currently the best way to make materials accessible. I'll talk more in detail how we did that a little bit later. But so we, in the fall, that was the spring of 2016, we did our first semester of OER with business calculus. And so then comes fall of 2016, we've converted to OER materials that we have created and are accessible. I'm saying I'm doing accessible because that's a challenge, and they weren't completely, but they were in pretty good shape. So fall of 2016, I say to Amy and Suzanne, you know, we're teaching survey and math. Why don't we go to OER accessible materials for our survey and math students as well? And Amy and Suzanne are always open to anything. And they're like, yeah, since it's fall already, we'll do that next fall. So we have all summer to prepare for that. Well, it took us a couple weeks. So by then it's December of 2016. And it's like, well, you know, if we're going to do this, why don't we just dive in and go ahead and do it for January? Yes, we were that crazy to totally move from a textbook to OER materials from December to January. But there were 3 of us, so it was only 1/3 the workload. And so we did that. And now between the 5 or 6 of us on campus that are using OER materials, we have business calculus, survey of math, finite math, pre-calculus, intro to statistics, and our math for teacher courses are all using OER accessible materials. So that really, because of we had this background in creating OER and accessible materials, most of our content was already in some online format when we had to switch to virtual in March of 2020. So we really kind of were ahead of the curve on that part of that switch. That was a little easier than for a lot of other faculty members. The 3 things that I really want to talk about in terms of what we were using for OER is GitHub and MyOpenMath and Desmos. So I'm going to start with GitHub. So as I said earlier, when you are creating your own OER materials, lots of ways to do that. We originally chose GitHub. GitHub is a free site that lets you create HTML content that you can publish as a web page. One of the best features of GitHub is that you have version control. So you can have multiple versions of the same thing and be able to keep track of different versions, what you've done, what you haven't done. We originally decided to go this route because several of us were using the same materials. We chose GitHub instead of our learning management system because we could make one correction. If we had a typo, which we did, we could make one correction in GitHub and everybody got the correction instead of everyone having to do it in their own LMS. So this is an example of just one of our problems. This happens to be in our statistics course. Notice that part of the text is in black and part of it is in red. The red are the solutions. So when we print the materials, the solutions don't print so that our students have a packet that they can work in. But the solutions, always worked out step by step, are always available online for our students to use. So they have a packet and then they have the solutions. I'm trying to see if I left anything out. I don't think I did. Okay. Now for homework. Okay, so for homework, we went with MyOpenMath. There is a paid version of MyOpenMath that is $25 per student. That is all I can tell you about the paid version because I have never used it. I've been using MyOpenMath since 2016. I've always used the free version, and the free version has been able to do every single thing that I wanted it to do. You have choices in MyOpenMath. There are courses already built for you. You can build a course for yourself, which is what we have done. There are, I'm going to say, hundreds of thousands. I tried to look up how many problems there are in MyOpenMath, and I could not find that number. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Virtually every concept you want to have a homework problem for is there. And you can use the problems that are there. You can edit the problems that are there so they will look exactly the way you want them to. Or you can also write your own problems. And if you decide to ever go that path, make sure when you write your own, share them so the rest of us can use them and then we don't have to write them for ourselves, please. MyOpenMath has many of the features that the publisher's homework systems have as well. You can give students extended time on assignments. You can do homework, you can do tests, you can do quizzes, there's a grade book. You can make exceptions for students who have accommodation plans. My favorite feature of MyOpenMath is late passes. I give all of my students 5 late passes at the beginning of the semester. And then there's no excuse. I don't care about your late homework. You have 5 chances for late homework and then you're out of luck. And Desmos is the other free resource that we use. I used to use graphing calculators exclusively and require them of all my students. Again, $100. $100 is a lot of money to a lot of our students. So instead, I use the free Desmos graphing calculator. I love it. I use it almost exclusively. This is one of the examples I use in my business calculus class when I'm introducing the definition of a derivative as a limit. And we're talking about secant lines versus tangent lines. And they get to see this, you know, how this line moves and how the slope of the line changes from secant to the tangent. So it's this really good lead in to the definition of a derivative. It also does things as simple as clearly graphing a line. It has table features. I put the little fraction there, changing 0.75 to 3/4. This week, my statistics students are doing probability, and reducing fractions has been a challenge for them. Desmos is a free calculator that will reduce fractions for them so they don't have to buy one. It also does much more complicated stuff, unit circle, you know, stats, all kinds of things. Really worth the time to investigate that as a resource.
Well, some of the OER solutions have been around for quite a while. One of them is Khan Academy. It's typically used for high school and lower grades, but I teach a geometry course for teachers, and I wasn't too sure about using MyOpenMath for the homework. So when I switched to OER materials, instead of using a traditional textbook, I created many of the assignments myself, but I knew that these students needed some practice with basic geometry skills. And it turned out that Khan Academy was the perfect solution for this specific application. It is free. You can custom design it for whatever problem sets you want to use. As many video lessons, examples that you want your students to have access to. So I chose to use this to supplement the basic skills for my geometry students that they needed. And I made several problem sets due each week to match what we're studying in class and to supplement their other assignments. They can attempt them as many times as they can. It was really easy for me to set up and then kind of just let it go the whole semester. The one downside that I have found with Khan Academy, though, and using it for my class is it doesn't give me an overall average for each student's work. So if I want to incorporate this into their grade, I have to download their scores to an Excel spreadsheet and compute their averages that way.
So we're going to pause here to see if anybody has posted any questions related to OER that we can answer for you now.
Looks like we got some other people who love MyOpenMath, and now I'm gonna have to investigate class calc because I have never heard of that. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, I haven't seen any other questions that y'all haven't addressed thus far.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about the different types of technology that we use in the classroom, in addition to some of the things that we have already talked about. And Mary's going to start by telling us a little bit about the use of 2 monitors.
Okay, so I really like the picture on the left that Amy just happened to put in because I figured out I really use 4 monitors. I have to have 1 monitor to see what my students are seeing. I have to have 1 monitor so I can see their faces in my Teams meeting. I have my iPad going on and my phone is reading the chat because I can't manage to do all that on 2 screens. And actually had a conversation with a faculty member. They had posted somewhere on social media somewhere this week how hard it was. They'd gone to their office and they had 2 monitors in their office, and it was so nice because at home they only had 1. And we're all like, how are you managing with just 1 monitor? More than 1 monitor virtually, when you're teaching virtually, is just, I think, essential.
So at Pellissippi State, the learning management system that we use is called Brightspace. And that's a big part of the technology that became even more critical when the pandemic began. We've learned with online and virtual classes that it's so important to help students stay organized. And so creating our content in our learning management system, we had to be really careful. We needed the layout to help our students keep track of their assignments and their due dates. And we found that it's really confusing for them when assignments are located in all sorts of different places in their learning management system. So what we've done is create every assignment in the content and keep that content layout week by week. So students will just go to Brightspace. They can go to the content for everything, click on whatever week it is, and there they'll find the assignments for the week. If there's any quizzes, there's a link to the quiz. If there's a discussion post, there's a link to that. Any tests are there. Projects, it's just all in one place, the one-stop shop. And the other thing I learned in designing the content layout that has been helpful for me as well as my students is, like, when I assign a project, I include the purpose for that project. So my students know, why are we doing this project? How does it connect to what we're learning in class? And then I very clearly explain the task, and I give them the criteria for success. We want to be very open and clear about what we're requiring students. I often have a rubric that's shown there that they can see how I'm going to grade their assignment.
I want to follow up on what Suzanne said. Keeping the students organized by having it all in content was what we were taught. It has helped me as the teacher as much as it has helped the students.
So this is my absolute favorite thing that I have added to my classes. I'm teaching classes virtually, so I'm still working from home and teaching them virtually. When Pellissippi State received money from the CARES Act, the deans of our department were asked to send along requests for what we could use that for. And our dean chose to purchase some iPads for the department to be used in teaching our classes. And so I had just gotten this iPad and I was kind of learning how to use it. I have an iPad, a personal iPad, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to use it in class. And she also got Apple Pencils for us. And then I went to a presentation, a professional development presentation, where somebody talked about sharing their iPad in their classes. And I was like, what? And they didn't show anything about how to do that. So I started learning how to do it. And that it has been the best thing that I've done. I start my classes on my computer, and then I join my class also on my iPad, so that I share things from my iPad, and I can still see my class and communicate to my class. I can still see the chat. And I can also write on my iPad. So this is an example of a document that I had shared in class, was sharing in class, and was writing on it as we were working through the problem in class. And that can be done on PDF files. It can be done on Word documents. You can take screenshots from websites and write on it. Just about anything. And another feature that is my favorite is the notes feature on the iPad, because I can draw perfect shapes. I can draw perfect squares, rectangles, circles, and triangles. When you use your pencil and draw the shape without lifting your pencil, it automatically transforms into a perfect shape. I use this all the time. It can be used for perimeter and area, of course, but I use the circles for pre-calculus when we're doing unit circle work and learning about coterminal angles and reference angles and the rotations of angles. It's wonderful. And it is particularly useful when I'm working one-on-one with students, when I'm tutoring students and we need to communicate back and forth. I pull out the iPad and I'm writing, and they might be writing on their end, but they can also see what I'm writing on my end. I share Desmos on the website. I just share the screen. Everything gets shared directly from the iPad, so I can continue to interact with my students and I can continue to see them. Another thing I have been using recently, the last 2 semesters, is Microsoft Forms. Microsoft Forms can be used both as polling. You can poll, you can ask for open-ended questions, and you can also do a quiz in Microsoft Forms. When I use it as a form to poll the students, I can then share the results. They can be anonymous. You can set it so that the results are anonymous. But I can also quiz the students. There is a quiz mode in Microsoft Forms, and I typically use this. Sometimes I'll do it at the beginning of class. Sometimes I'll do it in the middle of class as an attendance check. And these are not high stakes quizzes. These are quizzes so that students can check their own knowledge at the point where we are in each of the units. So we don't use them as high stakes quizzes, but I do like to use that feature. And again, I can share the results and I can share them anonymously. Kahoot is another website that's good to use. We are a Microsoft Office 365 school, so the Microsoft products you see, Microsoft Forms, are free to us. Kahoot is also a free website. Many of the features that you might want to use in Kahoot, you would have to pay for, so it's not entirely free. I do like it, but the one thing that I didn't like about it was the way it kind of makes everything into a competition between the students. And I didn't particularly care for that. But I did like being able to do quizzes. It would accept copying and pasting equations, which is something math people need regularly, and images and things like that. But a lot of the features do require a paid version of Kahoot.
So I have to say that everything I know how to do on my iPad, I learned from Amy. And I'm not quite to the point of using the forms on my Microsoft Forms on my iPad. So being the imposter that I am, during the pandemic, I started with Poll Everywhere. I thought, okay, let's start with the basics here. And there are really lots of apps out there that can be used to quiz or poll your students. I found Poll Everywhere was simple. It was a good choice for me. I was the last person in my family to get a cell phone. I was the last person in my family to get a smartphone. So I have to start with the simple ones, and this is a good place I would recommend to start. I think it works really nicely for getting quick feedback from students. I like the Wordle option. I asked my students at the beginning of this semester to describe how they were feeling in one word. And I was glad that excited was the largest word in the Wordle. But of course, stressed and anxious were a big part of it. Poll Everywhere is free as long as you have less than 40 students or 40 responses with your poll. And I just simply put the link to my poll in my chat. And then during class, students can click on that link and bring up the poll on their own device. Now, before the pandemic, I was actually using another, I guess it's a polling app called Socrative. I used it with my face-to-face students. And so I have also used that with my virtual classes. I thought it worked really well in a math class. And also when I had my students working in small groups, competing against each other on a review. So some of my students are motivated when they have a competition. They got to win like an extra late pass or something. So the Socrative worked really well for the competitions, whereas the Poll Everywhere did not. My next thing that I want to learn, I went to a seminar on quizzes, which is a similar polling app like to Kahoot. I think it's similar to Kahoot. And so that's the one I kind of challenge myself each semester to learn one more new technology, and that's the next one on my list. Okay, so actually, the next thing we want to talk about is an app called Remind. I could not teach virtually without the Remind app. I couldn't even teach face-to-face without it either. This is an app that's perfect for sending out announcements to my class, things that I forgot to say during the meeting, or if I just need to catch a student and remind them to do something. It's a texting app. It's a way to text with students without exchanging actual phone numbers. And of course, our students are going to see a text and read a text way before they read their email. It's hard to get some of my students to even look at their email. With a lot of my students, this is their preferred way of communicating with me. They will send all their questions on Remind. And based on the settings that you choose, you can even use Remind for your students to communicate with each other. So in my classes, I use homework partners. And my students, this is in my classes for my future elementary teachers, they have homework partners and they need to work together with their partner in preparing presentations for class. And so this is a great way for them to be able to text each other.
Okay, so we're going to pause again to see if we've had any questions related to different technology that we use in our classes, or maybe something you use in your classes.
Yeah, we've actually had quite a few come in since the last question round. So let me just start at the earliest one I saw. Do you have any pre-calculus courses available in OpenMath, as open resource, excuse me, OER?
Yes, I do. I teach pre-calculus OER, and I have a course in MyOpenMath that I use for their homework. And I have created over the course of the last 3 semesters, my OER course is written in our learning management system. We use Brightspace. So all of it is in the learning management system written in HTML.
And it was, they specifically asked in MyOpenMath. That's
yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and
I do.
Also, what about math for elementary teachers?
So I teach the geometry and number concepts for elementary teachers, and I've kind of done the same thing as Amy is, I've created a lot of my own materials in our course management system in Brightspace. I've created my own assignments there. And then I've supplemented with Khan Academy. I do not have anything in MyOpenMath for those two classes. Now, I did collaborate with a teacher or a professor from another college who had done the same thing. We shared problem sets with each other. So I wasn't having to create every single assignment, myself from nothing. But I did a lot of it on my own.
Okay, great. Someone also asked, do you have MOM classes as a template course? I'm not real sure what that means, so I'm just going to leave that with, see, I hope maybe y'all know.
Well, we have MyOpenMath homework assignments that we share the template course for, but it doesn't include like lessons or videos for students to watch in between the homework sets or anything. So it's really just homework sets.
Okay.
But it is possible to create a course in MyOpenMath that would include all of that. We've
Right.
just chosen not to do it. We're using our learning management system instead.
Next question, is it difficult to use GitHub?
If you have some basic HTML coding skills, then no, it is not.
Okay. And then there was a question about which iPad version would be in reference, but that one might have gotten, so they could not share on an older one they had.
Well, it's probably the newest. Like 4, the Air 4. And you might have to make sure your iOS is updated. Because it won't even, for the Apple Pencil, for example, that is a really new product. And the iPad I have, I had to update it to the newest iOS before I could use my Apple Pencil.
Yeah, true for me too.
And it may be that other tablets can be used also. That's just not something that we are familiar with because our department purchased the iPads.
Okay. Next question, how can you compare web work with MyOpenMath for homework?
I cannot.
What was that? Is that a brand name? I mean, is that a?
Yeah, web work is in all caps, like it's a
Yes,
thing.
we're not familiar with it, so we have no comparison.
Okay.
But now we're going to be looking into it, of course.
Right.
This
And then,
webinar is just giving me more work to do, y'all.
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
it says, how are equations written in order to be accessible? She says, all of my materials are in LaTeX.
In LaTeX. Yes, and we're about to
LaTeX.
talk about accessibility. So if you can hold on that question for just a second.
Okay, well, that's the last one. So y'all just move on.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about OER and we've talked about technology, and accessibility is a really big deal. And as it turns out, currently in most schools, all of this falls into the lap of faculty. And so we're going to share with you how we have tackled the accessibility puzzle in our classes.
Okay, and so for those of us who are using GitHub and our materials are there, all of our content is HTML5 with the math being written in LaTeX. And when we first started doing this back in 2015, we were actually typing LaTeX. We were using a LaTeX equation editor. And now we use MathPix, which is the best thing ever. It's even better than an iPad in my mind, because MathPix allows you to take a screenshot of any math equation that you want, handwritten or typed, and it will convert it to LaTeX for you. And then you just copy and paste it to wherever you are creating your materials. So for the 30 years of materials that we all have in our files, we don't have to recreate them. MathPix will convert them to LaTeX for us.
I wanted to add to that also that because when I created this pre-calculus course, I had all of these PDF versions of my solutions with my handwriting on it. And my handwriting is pretty neat. So MathPix does do a very good job. And I can even take several steps of a problem and take a picture of the whole thing, and it puts it in LaTeX, the whole, everything worked out. So it is pretty amazing. It's probably second to the iPad for me, but it's really close, a really close second.
And you get 100 free snips a month in MathPix, or it's $5 a month to pay for it. Or you sign up with multiple email addresses and then you get more than 100. You know, there are ways around it all. It is worth the yearly cost, I agree, especially if you're creating a course.
Okay, so talking about accessibility, I've done a lot of my materials, a lot of my assignments in our learning management system. Again, we use Brightspace. And as Mary said earlier, the gold standard for accessible content is HTML. So it is easier than you think to create HTML content. It really, to me, it just feels like typing. When I was creating my assignments in the learning management system, I started with a template. The one I use is called Simple Bootstrap. So I just say, I want to use that template, and then it creates all the HTML headers that I need for it to be accessible and be able to screen read it properly. And so then I just start typing what I want. There's an equation editor in our learning management system that I use for the math expressions. And when I created my assignments for my number concepts and geometry for teachers, I did a lot of copy pasting because I already had many of the problems I wanted to use in Word documents. I did have a lot of pictures and diagrams for geometry, so I had to write the alternate text for all of those pictures in order for it to be accessible. But it's not hard to do, it just is time consuming. Brightspace has a built-in screen reader that my students can just click on, and it will read the HTML content. It actually also will read Word documents and PDFs if they're accessible. One of my biggest headaches when I was doing all this was just trying to get my numbered list to number correctly in order. I had to go into the HTML code to fix that. But again, I'm an imposter, so if I can do it, anybody can figure it out. If you're using a Word document in a learning management system, you want to make sure you have used the accessibility checker in Word before you post that. And PDFs can be accessible to students, but there's some little details you have to do when you're saving a document as a PDF. It needs to be saved from an accessible Word document. And you have to click this thing that tells it to include the document structure tags for accessibility. It's one of the options when you're saving. Okay, so once I got everything set up in the learning management system, that's before classes ever start. Then we're actually starting to teach the virtual classes, and I use Teams, which is, you know, again, we're a Office 365 school. That's part of the package. So I use Teams for all my virtual class meetings instead of Zoom. I have heard that Zoom uses less bandwidth, so that could be, you know, one difference that has an effect with the quality of the virtual meeting. But there are some features in Teams that I really like for accessibility, and one of them is the class recordings. So I can just, you know, click to record my class meeting, and then when the class is over, the recording is automatically saved to stream. And I have it set up then that I can save that, or I don't know whether I'm just renaming it or making it accessible to my team, where students can just go to the team and click on a tab, and there are all the class recordings right there. They can just choose which one they want to watch, if they want to go back way at the beginning of the semester or just the day before's class. So it's just really easy for the students to access those recordings. Also, it's really easy for me, just one click, to add the captioning to those recordings in Stream. And so that makes them accessible with the closed captioning. I also use the files feature in Teams where my students post homework solutions, so that when we go over homework, and then I have my students post the solutions to be available to everyone instead of me having to do it. And they post those right there in our team.
So with accessibility, screen readers are an issue. And we often think of that with blind students who clearly need a screen reader. But it's also true of students with some learning disabilities. In fact, last semester, I had 2 students in one class who both had accommodation plans where they needed all the materials in the course to be screen readable. So I had individual meetings with these 2 students, and I asked them which screen reader they used. And they both said Kurzweil, which is evidently a very common screen reader used, especially in K-12. Well, unfortunately, Kurzweil does not read math, and they were in my math class. So I had to get those students and connect both of us with the technology person in our disability services office, so that those students could be trained to either use JAWS or NVDA. Our school kind of pushes JAWS, which is a quite robust screen reader, but there's a cost to that. NVDA is free, that all of us can download on our computers and use that. So it's not only important to make sure your materials are screen readable, it's important to talk to your students about which screen reader they use. And the one last thing I would like to say about that is, you don't know if your materials are screen readable unless you listen to them. You can think you are doing every single thing right in terms of accessibility and table, column, and row headers and numbering and headings and all of the things we've been taught to do. But until you actually listen to it, you really don't know if it's reading the way it should. So we all should be creating accessible materials and then listening to them, because we've had to go make quite a few corrections because it wasn't reading what we thought it would read.
Okay, so we're going to pause again to see if there are any questions or comments related to accessibility in the classroom.
So I've seen 2. One is not necessarily related to that, but somebody asked if you've heard that MyOpenLab won't be free in the future.
I haven't heard anything about that recently. When Lumen first partnered with the MyOpenMath guy, my understanding was that that partnership agreement was going to be that there would always be a free version available. But that was something that I heard, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. So that may not be true now.
Okay, and somebody else has chimed in and said that's their understanding as well. And then the only other questions that's come in so far is someone was saying they're not real familiar with LaTeX yet. How does it work with accessibility?
LaTeX is the math code that you put in so that the screen reader will read the math appropriately. So it will read square root and integrals and the derivative of and all of those things. So it's not really something you have to learn. It's a whole coding language. But you don't have to learn the coding language because MathPix will do it all for you.
Well, all right. That's the only questions that have come in so far that y'all haven't already answered in chat. So I say carry on. Thanks.
Okay, so we've looked at our OER practices. We've looked at the technology we've incorporated, and we've looked at how we have met the accessibility requirements. And now we just want to share with you some of our other best practices that we have learned over the course of the last year. And so the first practice would be to greet the students as they enter class. And this is in terms of teaching virtually. We are trying to provide the students with as close to an on-campus experience as possible. And so one of the things we should do is greet the students. So I always start my classes at least 10 minutes early. And as the students are arriving to class, I say hello to them by name, each and every single one of them, as long as I catch every one of them as they're coming into class. Many times, almost every single day, the students will come in with some questions on homework. So they'll stop in early and they'll have some questions. It also gives them, when I start the class early, it gives them some time to work out any technology issues they may have. If they can't get into the meeting or whatever, if they have some internet issues, it usually gives them some time to resolve those. And I have also been asking my students questions every single day as they arrive, and I come up with something different every single day so that we can have a conversation as they're arriving. And this gets them to start communicating with me and feeling more comfortable in talking out loud in a virtual environment. I ask them, like on Monday, I asked them what they ate during the Super Bowl. What did they have during the Super Bowl? And just as expected, the most popular food was chicken wings. So I asked them what type of music they like to listen to. As we get close to the weekend, probably tomorrow, I will ask them what kind of weekend plans they have. One day this week, I think on Tuesday, I said, we are now in the 4th week of classes. Are you adjusting to the semester? Are you able to manage your time well? And today I asked them, it was pouring down rain here today, just kind of a yucky, cold, rainy day. And I asked them what their most favorite thing to do on a rainy day is. So I try to come up with something. It's always spur of the moment question to greet my students as they are entering the class. I also have been doing one-on-one meetings with my students within the first 2 weeks of class. Now, I want you to keep in mind, I also serve as the assistant dean of our department, so I'm only teaching one 5-credit-hour class. So this is manageable for me. If you have 140 students, it's probably not so manageable. But I have found it has really had an impact on the way my class goes. And so I schedule these one-on-one meetings with the students within the first 2 weeks. We meet in teams. I schedule 30-minute meetings, but they usually only last about 15 minutes. And I ask them some of the questions that I ask them at the first meeting are on the slide. I ask them if it's their first semester in college and what they're majoring in. I ask them how many credit hours they're taking, and I also ask them how many hours they are working. And we spend a little bit of time talking about the balance between their work hours and the credit hours they are taking. And, you know, if they're way over that balance, you know, I have a student who is taking 18 hours and working 45 hours a week. And we kind of talked about how that's a very stressful balance. It will be a very difficult balance for her, I would assume. So we have those kinds of conversations. I ask them what they like to do in their free time, give them a chance to kind of talk about themselves a little bit. I ask them if they have any questions for me, you know, if anything has come up. We talk a little bit about the course policies. And we also talk a little bit about any information they might have to share with me that affects their performance in the course. Maybe they have a health issue or some kind of a disability, or maybe their work hours sometimes will affect their attendance in the course, that kind of thing. It's just a basic meeting where I can get to know them a little bit better, and I can match a face with the name when we meet in teams. And then the second meeting I have with them, which occurs sometime after midterm, are tailored more to the particular student. If the student is doing exceptionally well, I make sure that I tell them that I'm very proud of their progress and that whatever they're doing, they need to keep doing. If a student is not doing particularly well, we might talk about some things that they can change in their study habits to help them finish the semester successfully. So those are tailored specifically for each of the students.
As we know, with virtual classes, we have the challenge of keeping our students engaged. It's a little bit different than in face-to-face classes. So I have found there's nothing like calling on students to keep them engaged, calling them by name. In my classes, students have to answer when I call on them in order to be counted present, and that could be at any time during the class. And in order to help me manage this effectively, I actually keep a set of index cards for each of my classes, and I put one name per card. And as I'm ready to call on a student, I just randomly pick a card, and that's the person I call on. So I have them color coded. I have a different color for each one of my classes. And that way I'm not always calling on the same person. It's just random, and it helps take, there's so many things that I'm juggling, you know, when I'm teaching virtually. It just helps take my brain off of that and still be able to call on them effectively.
So I'm going to piggyback on Suzanne, because I learned years ago that I'm going to do whatever Suzanne does because it's going to be the best thing ever. So I use her card system. And so this particular week, I have this one student who was in class every day, but for 3 days in a row, he didn't answer when I called on him. So I sent a remind message to him yesterday afternoon and texted him and said, hey, remember, if you don't answer when I call on you, you are counted absent, even though you have signed into the meeting. And miraculously, this morning when I called on him, he was there and answered my question. So Suzanne's ideas always work. So another thing that we use to keep students engaged is breakout rooms, so that I personally miss the small group interaction that I had in face-to-face classes. I miss walking around the room and sitting down with my groups and talking to them and hearing what they have to say and how they're thinking. So we can do it virtually. It's not as good, but it's still doable. So in my statistics classes this semester, I'm using breakout rooms, and I'm just letting teams assign them randomly. So like today, we were working some probability problems, and I just sent them to breakout rooms to do some problems, and then we came back and discussed them. I did join each room, and I make sure I do that to see what they're talking about and how they're interacting. Also, in their breakout rooms, I make them have on their cameras and their microphones so they can see each other and talk to each other. I don't make them do that in the big class, but I make them do that in the breakout room, and I think that aids in their communication. In my calculus class, they work on this big project throughout the semester, this group project. So I don't randomly assign them to breakout rooms. I assign them specifically, their groups go to same room every time, trying to get those groups to work really well together so that they can be successful in their project, which is a major grade in that class.
So I don't know how many Teams users there are out there. The breakout rooms are new. In January, they were new. I believe it was January. They were brand new to us this semester. They just appeared. So we were using channels prior to that, and it was a little clunkier, and you had to assign the students, whereas with the breakout rooms, you can just let teams do that for you. So I check attendance differently. I check attendance by randomly randomly asking my students to post something in the chat feature. And that may be twice in one class, or it may be once, and it's never the same time. It's just whenever I just feel like doing it. And again, a lot of times it's just random questions that have popped into my head, but many times on the attendance checks, they are answering things related to what we're doing during that class time. And I tell them, and it's recorded, I keep the recordings, but every single day I say, you are required to post in the chat. If you do not post in the chat, you will be counted absent. So I tell them that every single day. And if somebody does not post in the chat, I contact them after class to make sure they're aware that they were counted absent. So it happens, you know, you have issues at the beginning of the semester, but then usually after they've been caught, they typically come back to class and actually participate in class from then on out, if they're going to be there at all. So we have shared many, many things with y'all today. There's probably some things we may have left out, but we only had a certain amount of time. Do you have any final questions for us?
Really, in this last part, we've just had one come through, and that is, how do you ensure integrity in final exams when you're teaching an online course?
Well-
Amy and I have different philosophies on that. And so,
Well-
and that's fine. That's not a bad thing. I proctor my tests in my midterm and my final. I give more tests than that, but they are not proctored. And I just proctor them in Teams. And I know that is not foolproof by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a time test. They need to have a pretty good understanding to complete it in the time, but it is much easier than trying to get correct students to be able to use the proctoring service. But Amy.
So we have a proctoring service that we use at our school, and we just got a brand new one. So I have only actually used it on a practice quiz, and not all of my students have even done that yet. They're doing it this week. And it is your typical proctoring service that records the screen, records the student, takes a picture of their ID at the beginning, and throws up flags if there's any flags in during the recording, and you can choose the flags. We're using Proctorio. I'm not going to recommend it because I have no idea whether I should recommend it, because we're just starting to use it. But that's what I use. We used HonorLock last semester, and I thought it was really easy to use. Again, if there's cheaters are going to cheat, and I've just resolved that in my mind that it's going to happen if it's going to happen, but I'm at least trying to take precautions against it. There are always certain steps that Mac users have to take in order to permit the proctoring services to use their webcams, but I had several Mac users last semester and it worked fine. They were able to get their webcams working, and then this semester we'll see.
I do want to make a comment. I tried to use HonorLock with my calculus students. It was a disaster. That I ended up proctoring half of them in Teams. So I actually dropped into a group, a breakout group in one of my calculus classes. And one of the students was saying, oh yeah, my tutor showed me this website. You just have to type the problem in and it gives you the answer, and she'll never know. And of course, he didn't know that I just happened to drop into the breakout room and heard every word of it. And I said, oh yes, I'm aware of that. But remember, I'm grading all of your work. So they're writing all their work and all their steps down for me, which they submit. And I grade that just as I would grade a paper test. And if you have the right answer and your steps don't make sense, you get 0 credit.
Yeah, and I would like to add, I think in the virtual environment, the way that I assess students is different than in a face-to-face classroom. I have decided to put less emphasis on traditional tests, and I assess my students in multiple other ways. And I think that's important in teaching virtually, to kind of get out of the box there and think of other ways that you can still assess what your students know. But when I create my tests to help keep them honest, as much as possible, I write my own questions. So it's not a question that a student can go and just Google. And like Mary said, require that they show their work. In my teacher classes, I like to design questions where they have to write a paragraph response. In my statistics class, I require, even if they're using StatCrunch or their calculator or some kind of app, statistical package, they have to tell me what they did in StatCrunch, what the steps they did, where did they go in StatCrunch to get their answers. So showing the work is a big part of it.
Someone else has asked, have any of you tried doing oral final exams?
We haven't, but we do have colleagues who have tried that. But you'd have to break your classes apart and do a student at a time or a couple students at a time. I'm not sure how that would really work, but I do know some people who have actually have done that before. Or they have made part of their exam oral, where they meet with the student and give them a couple questions orally, and then they have to show what they've just done to work those problems.
Right. And Julie Phelps just shared in the chat that she uses Flipgrid and have them do
Mhm.
some video for her. So that's another option.
Oh, that's
Yes,
good.
Flipgrid is, yes.
Yeah. But y'all, it's time to wrap things up. Y'all, thank you so much. Y'all did a great job. I love all the interaction in chat. A lot of people are throwing you kudos in the chat. Just a quick reminder that the Math Summit, which sponsored the partners of the Math Summit, which sponsored this webinar series, we are still going to have the Math Summit. It has moved to a virtual format now, and we will be sharing more information on that very, very soon. We have a meeting coming up this month to finalize those plans. So just keep checking the NOS or the AMATIC website for that information. There is another webinar coming up in March, and you can see that information coming out soon as well. That one will be with Paul Noting. So y'all all have a great afternoon and stay safe. And thanks again, Pelissippi Trio. You imposters did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.